Good evening, friends. Today I will tell you about the embryo grading. Now, understanding the embryo grading, how to grade the embryos. One of the most questions that an embryologist gets from the patients is, what do the grades of my embryos tells us about the chances of getting pregnant? The answer for this question is not a simple one. In this video, I will explain you how an embryologist grade embryos and what those grade means as far as an embryo's potential for development. And embryo grading system are subjective. While we can make educated guesses about an embryo's potential based on the experience of many grading millions of embryos, there are many cases of embryos with poor grades that make pregnancies and perfect embryos. Also, no matter the grading system, the embryo grades do not tell what is going on inside the embryo genetically. Different IVF grading systems for day 3 and day 5 embryos. Grading system is being used to help the embryologist determine which embryos to transfer or freeze. The embryo transfer occurs either 3 days or 5 days after a retrieval. Because embryos are developmentally different on these days, we have different grading system for day 3 embryos, that is cleavage stage, and day 5 embryos, that is blastocyst stage. Each has been discussed further. First, day 5 embryo grading, quality of division. Day 3 embryos are referred to as cleavage stage embryos. The reason for this designation is that the cells in the embryos are dividing or cleaving, but the embryo itself is not growing in size. For example, think of a chapati or bread. When you slice it, you make more pieces of the chapati or bread itself, but you do not increase the size of the chapati. This is what actually a cleavage stage embryo is like. The genetic material replicates and the cells divide, but the volume of the embryo does not differ from the volume of the unfertilized egg. Conceptually, one might think that embryos would divide in a very specific sequence. One cell becomes two, two cells becomes four, four cells become eight, and so on. However, actual embryos do not divide synchronously. We usually see 3, 5, 6 cell embryos. It is not an indication of a poor embryos but of one that is growing normally. This is the picture of the high quality embryo, and there is the poor quality embryo. As embryos divide, sometimes a small portion of cytoplasm, that is the inside of the cell, breaks off and forms a fragment. Fragments do not contain nuclei and are not considered cells. The cause of fragmentation are poorly understandable, but embryos containing a lot of fragmentation are developmentally disadvantaged simply because of the cells. As the cells lose too much cytoplasm, the cellular machinery to the fragments. Cleavage stage embryos are graded using two criteria: the number of cells in the embryos and their appearance under a high power microscope. Typically, a good normally growing day 3 embryos will contain between 6 and 10 cells. The embryo grade refers to how the cells in the embryo look. A grade 1 embryo, for example, is 1 in which all the cells are of the same size and there is no fragmentation in the embryo. This is the embryo grade. There are 5 different types of gradings. The grade 1 is in this cells are of equal size, no fragmentation is being seen. In grade 2, cells are of equal size, minor fragmentation only. And grade 3, cells are mostly of equal size, moderate fragmentation. And the grade 4, cells are of unequal size, no fragmentation to moderate fragmentation. Grade 5, cells are of equal or unequal size, fragmentation is moderate to heavy. Now, in this picture, it is shown all the 5 grades of an embryos. Now, the grade 1 through 2.5 embryos seem to have the greatest potential for developing to the blastocyst stage. However, a grade 3 embryo may also be of good quality if its appearance can be explained by asynchronous cell division rather than by poor development. The number of cells in the day 3 embryo is a better indicator of potential than the grade of the embryo. Therefore, an 8-cell grade 3 embryo would have better potential than a 4-cell grade 2 embryo on day 3. Day 5 embryo grading, cell type and expansion. On day 5 embryos are continuing to divide and the number of cells continues to increase, but the cells are also growing and differentiating into specific cell types. By this time, the embryos should have started to outgrow the space inside the zona pellucida, that is that pure shell that surrounds the embryo. They start to expand and thin the zona pellucida in preparation for the stage of development when the blastocyst bursts through the membrane hatching to prepare for implantation into the uterine lining. There are two cell types on the D5 embryos or blastocyst. One cell type forms the inner cell mass. This ball of cells will eventually grow into the fetus. The other cell type is the trophectoderm epithelium. This sheet of cells will go on to make tissues needed during pregnancy like the placenta. Together, these cell types make a fluid-filled sphere with the T cells on the outside and the ICM inside. Both the cell types are necessary to establish a healthy pregnancy. A woman cannot have a baby without placenta and she cannot have a pregnancy without a fetus. So when embryologists grade embryos at the blastocyst stage, embryologists assign a letter grade to each of the cell types as well as the fluid-filled cavity or blastocele. Embryologists also assign a grade to designate how much the embryo is expanded. This relates to how large the blastocele is as well as how many cells are contained in the embryo. Very early blastocyst. In this, the cavity is just beginning to form in the embryo and the cell types are not yet distinguishable. Expanded blastocyst. In this, the cavity is fully formed. The embryo contains 100 to 120 of cells, but it still contains within the thin zona pellucida. Hedged blastocyst. In this, the embryo is outside of the zona pellucida and contains upwards of 150 cells. In this picture, here the very early blastocyst is being seen, the expanded blastocyst and the hedged blastocyst. The view of the cleavage stage and the blastocyst stage. This is this is the inner cell mass and this is the trophectoderm. Embryo grading is a tool. It is a tool that the physicians and embryologists use along with the patient's age fertility history, and other information to determine the optimal day of transfer, the appropriate number of embryos to transfer, and exactly which embryos to transfer. Thank you.